welcome to another episode of Otaku in Training. I am your host LB. Joining me as always is my co-host CT.
Hello.
And only one trainee this month. We have Bama joining us again.
Hi, everybody.
So for this month, we wanted to go with a series that was vaguely more actiony. I know I described this series as actiony last month when we were closing things out, but let's be honest, this series is more Looney Tunes than anything else. But still, it's a good show. We wanted to expose our trainee to it, and that would be Angel Beats. Before we get into the nitty gritty and before we turn things over to our trainee, CT, I wanted to talk to you first about this series. I personally did not come into this series until a few years after it had first aired. I actually had a really big problem in 2010 with the main character looking way too much like Haruhi Suzumiya.
Yeah,
And
but that's
that
a good thing.
it bothered me to no end at the time. It just, it killed me and I hated it for it. So that was the reason why I didn't get into this series right away. Did you watch this series when close to when it aired, or did you wait a little while?
I did not. I know it was always a big thing, but it was something that I wasn't that wasn't the time period that was watching anything broadcast. That would start in much more seriously in kind of 2012. So this predated catching things as they aired, and it would just be if someone else picked it up, if there happened to be a good BitTorrent of it, something like that. So it was an eventually catch up on down the line because it's PA Works. It always comes up uh, when people start talking about like feelsy things. This will usually get a nod.
Yeah, and we've well established on previous podcasts your undying deep love for PA work, so
Yeah, a little bit.
And I'm actually kind of curious. You mentioned earlier that it was a good thing, so you had no problems at all with the main character looking something like Haruhi, or this didn't bother you at all?
No, I found it amusing that there were certain design elements in there, but and personality wise, it was very much. It did feel a bit like a Haruhi spin off, but we haven't gotten season 3 or anything more of the original here, so I'm happy getting it in any form. It is super appealing just in general, and everything else breaks away from it, so it really doesn't matter. I mean, you have the whole gang of idiots there, of which she is very much a prominent member of their idiocy. So, frankly, it doesn't feel much like it, excepting that it's a weird stuff happens in school thing. But the Looney Tunes comment by way of the action also represents the comedy. It is extremely farcical. So you get into all of the other beats for it and the wild transitions and everything else. I can appreciate rather than feel off put by the Haruhiisms contained within her. But she definitely has, more going on than just that front.
Alright, so getting into the first episode, it's established very, very quickly, within the first few seconds even, that we are in the afterlife, and the premise is that these group of people have gathered in the afterlife to protest their unjust, unfair lives on Earth, and are refusing to let themselves become reincarnated. Uh, Bama, I want to turn things over to you because I know that you are a little squeamish about blood and violence. So, but within the first few minutes of this episode starting, we have our main character splattered in a pool of blood multiple times. And I'm kind of curious, was that okay with you, or did that turn you off initially?
I to be honest, I remember thinking, wait a minute, stop. LB said he wasn't going to put me through anything terribly traumatic here. So I'm going to go ahead and trust him and we'll get past this. And I did. But yeah, if this hadn't come recommended by you, I wouldn't have watched it beyond the first 15 minutes or so. I would have dismissed it as um a shooting show. Kind of like the kid in Princess Bride calls it a kissing book.
Got it.
And I'm glad I didn't because I actually really enjoyed it. So, you know.
So, with this first episode, we meet all the characters, which, by the way, I really enjoyed Euripides' little descriptions of every character that lasted 2 or 3 seconds as she was introducing them. I thought that that was a fun way to meet all the characters, even though I found it terribly difficult to remember all of their names throughout the rest of the series. So that was a big thing for me, but that was fun. Let me see.
Did you need Sheena's name other than How Foolish Girl?
Really? No, not really. Now that you mention it. But the main thing that I took away from episode 1, and this is something that I had already known, because I, have watched this series before, but it was so great to get a reminder of how amazing the band Girls Dead Monster is in this
Mm.
series. Easily one of the best anime bands ever. I really enjoyed the music in in the first couple of episodes. And I really, to the point where I actually do still have some of their singles on my iPod. Yes, CT, I still have my iPod.
Mm.
um I still have some of their singles playing regularly on my iPod as I'm driving around. I still really enjoy the music, and I'm kind of curious, everybody else, CT, let's start with you. Opinions on the music for this first couple of episodes, I should say.
I mean, there's nothing like a little alchemy to go along with it. Yui was a real fan. I think that was her favorite song. Uh, it was definitely enjoyable. It was feeding into so much of the weirdness of the series right away. It's like, oh, they're dead and they're shooting at this indestructible angel and they're doing an important operation which involves fans and blowing meal tickets away from the rest of the students who are being distracted by the demo uh, sing, singing a song. I'm like, this is so weird. So I definitely enjoyed the songs. I'm not sure they will last with me. They are definitely well used in service of what's going on in the show, and I enjoy the kind of weird. It plays into the weird school involved tactics that they're using to continue on in this place without getting obliterated and striking back at the system. And it always involves very weird things that Otonashi is busy. When he gets them described to him, he always pictures something crazy, and then it ends up being something weird, like we're going fishing. So,
Yeah.
which then turns weird anyway. But it is such a loopy presentation of the whole world that it's definitely enjoyable.
Bama, how about you? What were your first impressions after the tone of the first episode just changes from, every few minutes there's something new going on? Did that confuse you at all? Did it intrigue you?
Confused more than intrigued, I think. The first note I wrote down was I'm not sure Angel is the enemy here because she retaliates, but she doesn't start anything. And I
Uh-huh.
noticed that, yeah, I noticed that as early as episode 3. That's me being a pacifist. Hi, everybody.
She does stab the
But
main
yeah,
character to death in the beginning.
yeah, just she didn't ever attack anyone unless they said something stupid like "prove I can't die." And I mean, well, how was she
Yeah,
supposed to respond to that? That's what I would have
I love
done.
it. I love that gets a callback.
But yeah, and I remember I didn't get fully intrigued until the first character vanishes, just poof, and she's gone. And I looked at Andy and
Uh-huh.
I said, did she just vanish? And fortunately, Andy had actually seen the show before, and she was able to say, yes, yes, she did. Keep watching. And that was really when I got invested.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the third episode is a really solid episode in my opinion. I really enjoyed learning the backstory of this character and seeing her become the first one to disappear and reincarnate and show that yeah, it can be done and this does happen. You just have to, find your peace, which I thought was really fun, which I thought was an interesting thing for them to introduce early on in the series. It gave, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? It gave purpose, I suppose, is what I'm looking for, is in that, and it gave a plausible out for characters to exit the series later on, which we'll get back to.
Right, because they're busy presented in the beginning as being immortal and existing within the system, but trying to dodge being obliterated, which is where the whole meal ticket system comes from. I think that's where more of the confusion comes from. It feels like more of the rules were presented probably in the visual novel that I don't think came across too well in the anime. But
Mm-hmm.
you could pick it up over time, but some of it just sort of melds into the overall weirdness.
So all right. Uh the first 3 episodes, like I said, it's mostly set up. It's mostly, getting everything established and getting the rules figured out on, who everybody is, what role they're playing, Angel especially. Um but yeah, basically that's what happens in the first 3 episodes. Episode 4, I think, is when things started to get more on track and find its footing, with the introduction of Yui right away taking over for the vocalist who disappeared in episode 3. I think that's where the series started to find its footing. I like that they remixed the opening theme song to allow for that to happen, even though I was listening to it dubbed, and yeah, Yui's Japanese singing voice sounds nothing like her English speaking voice, which threw me off a little bit.
Mm.
The other thing that I wanted to bring up, and I'm kind of curious to hear everybody else's thoughts on this. There's a running joke that gets introduced in episode 2, and it's used a couple of more times throughout the rest of the series, of basically one guy coming to the aid of the other and immediately being asked, "Are you gay?" And I'm kind of curious to know what everybody else's thoughts on this joke was, because I don't think it aged particularly well. It might have been, funny back in 2010, but now it feels like it just didn't age as well. CT, I want to hear from you first. What do you think about that?
It is pretty cringy in the beginning, but so I was keeping an eye out on it throughout, and I think it only gets a bit with Otanashi and Hinata a couple times in the beginning, and then a bit of that with Naoi later. But then after that, I mean, they're totally just his boyfriends by the end anyway, and no one is really throwing that around at that point. And I was like, it would be nice if they could do a meaningful thing in the end. They don't, after the halfway point, they're not playing that off for a constant joke. So while it does, obviously these days does not land well during the setup, it doesn't continue to get focus throughout. And admittedly, it doesn't get good payoff. You still have a meaningful scene with Naoi and Otanashi during graduation and things like that, and they do not at any time interrupt that to give you a callback to the joke, which I was thankful of.
Bama, did you have any thoughts on that you wanted to chime in, or do you basically just kind of agree?
Oh, I just got to where I was screaming, "No, he's bi" at the screen every time the question came up. And Andy started joining me, so then we're getting this little "No, he's bi" chorus and discussions of bi erasure, and I'm going to be just as silly as the show is. Dang it!
No, that's totally fine. So, alright. So speaking of Noi, he gets introduced in episode 4 along with Yui. Um, there's the whole baseball theme going on. I enjoyed the fake out at the end on if this this character was going to get reincarnated after catching the pop fly, but gets tackled by Yui instead. I thought that was a fun little fake out, and it was amusing to me. What I was trying to get at is that basically we establish in these middle episodes that Angel isn't the enemy and that Noi is taking over as the villain. Especially after episode 5 when they make Angel, fail all of her tests. Which, by the way, that episode was probably the funniest of the series. I think, especially with all the slow motion death jokes where they would play a few seconds of the ending theme in each class.
Yes, well, Yuri had to do the proper what is it? The proper distractions at a certain point and explode their chairs. And they die on the ceiling, and everyone is looking that way. And then you can shuffle the paper around there. Also, I think we get the first look at Takamatsu's impeccably chiseled shiny chest during
Oh
that.
yes,
So
I
that is a
enjoyed that
glorious
very much.
that is a glorious new character to add to the show.
The one
I
thing I
very much.
noticed about the one thing I noticed about this series in particular is that whenever a male character is shirtless, they are ripped. There is very few instances in this series where we see a shirtless guy who is not just built, and that's a little surprising to me.
I feel like it was mostly Takamatsu, but that might just be because he has always had the glistening, the sparkle glisten to it. So maybe I just
Uh-huh.
didn't notice the other chiseled guide chests throughout. I guess maybe Matsushita gets that at the end after he skinnied himself off for the final conflict.
Yeah.
I don't know. Speaking from a female perspective, I'm so used to seeing, just in media in general, you see a lot of thin, beautiful women, wandering around in bikini tops or whatever. And it was really, really nice to have something that I like to look at too.
Gotta have equal opportunity fan service.
Oh,
Man
yeah.
service in this case.
So,
Wow.
Bama, you mentioned earlier that you had figured out really early on in the series that Angel wasn't the enemy, and by episode 5 in the epilogue, we see that, Angel is true. Angel basically isn't the enemy, and that Noi is basically taking over as the new villain. I'm kind of curious what you were thinking at this point. Did you feel vindicated in figuring that out, or?
Oh, yeah. I was like, called it, called it, called it, called it, called it. And Andy's looking at me funny because, you're not really supposed to be singing that song if you're an adult. But no, I very, very much enjoyed being able to figure that out. And I honestly kind of figured I might be wrong since since it was my first impression. So I was very happy to have won that particular one. And I wondered even then if Noai was going to wind up being as black as they paint, and I was not surprised when he kind of wasn't really.
Uh-huh.
But I like that. There's if you're trying to show kind of a complex world with these shades of gray, that's a good thing. You don't want black and
Mm-hmm.
white villains.
It's hard for me to remember what my initial impressions of such a thing were. I suspect that at the time, I mean, obviously, Tenchi, our angel here, is introduced as a dangerous, powerful, just emotionless, Terminator, effectively. And she does indeed, kill Otanashi in the beginning, even if he does mention the thing. You only get to understand later on why that's more of a funny, appropriate response rather than an immediately hostile response. Uh, so she does always come across as the antagonist, but when it flips over and they defeat her, because they've been introducing so much of this stuff in digital binary game programming terms, which again is a weird thing if they're all kind of if they're supposedly in some kind of purgatory, uh, the fact that they're playing off the video game theme seems to run at odds. I think it probably makes more sense when you're in the middle of playing it as a visual novel. Uh, but you'd think that that's throwing things a little bit sideways, and you're busy trying to say, well, is this actually everyone trapped in a game? But then again, that's post Sword Art Online that everyone thinks that.
Yeah.
However, it does come across that simply it's the system or the rules of this world that made Angel an antagonist, and when they removed her from the student council president position and someone else went into it, that person, I immediately, now I immediately uh, uh, essentially seemed to become a big deal and now the threat, and it's like, oh, it's the role rather than the person necessarily. And yeah, maybe they can turn the angel into an ally or at least get along with her at this point. I don't think I necessarily treated it as was never an enemy to begin with. I think it came across more as in this is the system that they're playing in. I mean, they're referring to everyone as NPCs, so the moment someone else becomes student council president, they are the threat now, and the other person is not. That's I'm pretty sure that's how it would have come across at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm having a hard time remembering exactly how I reacted the first time I watched this series all the way through to completion. I remember I did not watch this series until Sentai Filmworks released it on DVD, and they sent me a review copy, and I reviewed it for my old website. And that was the first time that I, gave it a fair chance. Because I remember I watched like the first episode when it first aired, and wrote it off for some reason or another. I'd have to look up why I wrote it off.
Well, you said that in
But
the beginning. It was too much Haruhi.
I know there was more than that to it. The main thing that turned me off about it when it first aired was that the main character looked like Haruhi. But I remember I tried it, and there was something about it that drove me mad, and I just wrote it off. So it was, but I am having trouble remembering what exactly I felt the first time I watched this series. I remember, you know, feeling a lot more strongly about it. So I think that was part of it, but I can't even remember what year I watched it in originally. So yeah.
Now
So
we do get Yuri's backstory in these episodes somewhere, right? Or we
uh
already had.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean her story comes out way back in episode like 2, I think.
Two. I didn't think we had hers before Iwasawa's, did we?
I
Yeah.
thought yeah, yeah.
Mm. I guess maybe we did, but because we're about to start on Otonashi's backstory as well, and whenever you introduce memories with tiny little children, you know, you know that it's going to be cheat mode, sticking a dagger in your guts.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, around episode 8, I have a note down that says that characters dying over and over again were starting to grate on me. And
Hmm.
so by that point, I was feeling ready for the characters to move on. And by that point, I wouldn't say I was white knuckling it through it because I still enjoy this series, but it was around that time that I noticed the pacing was a little slower than it really needed to be. Episodes felt like they were taking a little longer to get through. Did anybody else notice that, or is that just a me thing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. The one I enjoyed quite a bit more than I was expecting to was the fish episode.
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
in the middle of all of this weirdness, we're talking about characters dying traumatically and having really horrible lives, and this is the afterlife, and they're trying to find peace, or maybe they're not trying to find peace, and in the middle of all this, let's go fishing.
Yep.
And I that was the episode I
Gotta
think I
eat.
laughed the hardest in.
Hmm. I don't think I had too much of a problem with the pacing because I felt like the show was still trying to keep you figuring out just what the heck it was going to be about. And what I mean by that is in episode 3, we get our first character who self obliterates. And we hadn't even seen the angel take anyone out like that before. And it's like, oh, okay. And then the next one is baseball and Hinata. You get the fake out that Hinata is going to disappear, even though we didn't get a backstory. We got backstory for Iwasawa. We didn't get any for Hinata at that point. And um and then it's like, okay, I thought we were going to lean into a, like a person, an episode finds their way out of here kind of thing, and you get some drama towards the end, and then it's like, nope, not that. And then in episode 5 it's turning, the angel away from being the primary antagonist, and then you're like, okay, so now we have to reinvent the structure of that sort of thing. So I wasn't getting a feel in what the work wanted to be. And I do have an issue with that in the overall structure. But at this point, I don't have any set expectation of what I want to feel like is happening and what motion is going, because I don't know what it's going to do by the end. There are certain things that keep trying to spin you around every few episodes. And in this one, it felt like it had a nice episode 3 major thing, and then it was going to set a new expectation. And it spent the next 3 just kind of going, nope, 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 nope. and bopping around, going different directions. And it's like, okay, all right, whatever. See what's going on. And 7, we get both the fish and Otonashi's memories, so his sister starts coming in. And of course, inevitably, I'm trying to think if the angel is his sister, and that's why he's pulled in here as well. There are certain things that seem like it's probably obvious, but overall, Maeda doesn't write terribly straightforwardly, so you don't get you don't get exactly what you think probably is happening, but it makes the next few episodes pretty weird because you're busy trying. They lean into the whole, like, this is a game sort of thing. You get the angel and she's helping, but then there's an evil clone and they have to go fight that. And you get a repeat of the delving into the guild and everyone's dying one after another, doing the judo plots on top of it. Oh man. That might be where I was laughing the most, was when they were doing the sacrifice play thing again, but it was just ridiculous. These stupidly dangerous angels there, and someone just sort of jumps on top of her, gets stabbed to death, but it pins her down, and everyone walks around. And that's how they defeat each clone.
So, getting into the last few episodes, episode 9 is where we start getting Otonashi's big backstory and what he was doing after his sister died and how he died. That's pretty much, besides Yui in episode 10, that's pretty much the last, like, origin story that we got. And I'm kind of curious to hear everybody's opinion. And I know that this is hard to do because, you can't really judge anybody. You can't really compare as very fairly, but I'm kind of curious, did anybody have a particular origin story in this series that hit you particularly hard? And Bama, I'm going to start with you. Did any characters have a story that really stuck out to you, or was it all just kind of, okay, this is all very tragic, but
I kind of liked the main character's story, I think.
uh-huh.
And the reason I say I think is I couldn't quite figure out how he went from this apparent orphan with a sister who has cancer, but like no parents. I mean, you don't see any parents at all. And he's really struggling and he's having a hard time trying to figure out, what he wants to do with his life. And after his sister passes, suddenly he owns a suit. I could not get over that, and I'm still having a hard time getting over that. Where did the suit come from? I mean, I know.
he,
So many questions I could be asking, but I got hung up on that, and I was absolutely
hanging up
fine. I
on
was buying everything until he shows up and he dies in this suit and tie, and I'm like, what? Wait, what?
he did have some people who are caring. Obviously, this is an anime or something Japanese story. Either your parents are abusing you or they're dead. That's what you're there for.
Yeah, I mean, you got the
at,
big eyes, the little
at least,
nose, and the dead parents. I mean, everyone knows this.
um, he came to himself because he was busy self pitying the whole time, where his sister was, the only thing that he was doing, and everything else was just him living through a part-time job. After she passed, you would normally think it's like, oh, here's the time where we're going to get an actual character suicide, which you're kind of expecting in a lot of these, is that it's there, even though Yuri says in the beginning, it couldn't be suicide. It's kind of like, well, you might be wrong here. This does feel like the sort of, if they're going to play up a purgatory, that is the kind of thing that gets played into the biggest trauma to get over. It's spun differently here, but in this case, Otonashi sees a girl his sister's age leaving the hospital, and his catharsis is just realizing that his purpose was, you know, being with her, comforting her, helping her as much as he could. And then he devotes himself to good scholarship in hopes of becoming a doctor, in hopes of helping more people, one assumes, in hopes of going into care to try to save people like his sister from their horrible fate, as it were. So the reason he was in a suit was, if I recall correctly, he was going to a not an entrance ceremony, but an entrance, like a med
A test.
school, that, like a test to get into it. So
Yeah, he was about
he
to go
leapt
take the
forward a
SAT.
number of years, and so he was dressed finely because it was, going to the right school, making a good impression. He'd been still working over it, so that was him having pulled himself together by that time, at which point a chance train encounter uh, kind of thumbed its nose at his hopes and dreams.
I do have to admit, while we're on the topic of Otanashi's past story and origin story, the one moment from that episode 9 in particular, that I really, really liked and thought that was a really nice little moment was when he is on death's doornail and the very last thing he does is circle the organ donor card part of his ID card and inspires everyone else to do the same. I thought that was just a really fun, good moment, and it that was probably the moment that touched me the most, especially in leading up to the final episodes.
All things considered, and the final revelation as part of it. Yeah, I didn't want to start with snark, but I was going to say that this is, the most complex and feelsy commercial for organ donation that that you can come up with.
The Yui's story also spoke to me, but that's because I've got some in my personal life. A couple of jobs ago, I helped people with developmental disabilities find and keep employment, and one of my clients was a born romantic. and all she really wanted to do was find a husband and settle down. And I think that that's something that people don't really think about, is people with, particularly severe disabilities, and they just want to fall in love, man. And there's nothing
Uh-huh.
wrong with that. And that was Yui's entire thing. I mean, she's running around like she's constantly hopped up on pixie sticks because, she's got mobility now. But
She's a living
she
pixie
doesn't
stick.
really care about pitching batting a home run or beating everybody in soccer. All she really wanted to do was fall in love. And I thought that was just really super sweet and poignant and reminded me of my client. So, that one probably hit me the hardest, honestly.
It is a little harder because it comes out in the course of one episode, and of course, the majority of that episode is training her to hit a baseball and German suplex. So even after the revelation, the main approach is pretty goofy. Uh, I think, of course, the other thrust of it, her primary concerns were, not just I can't do the things I want to do, I can just live vicariously through the TV, but was, yes, wants to live a normal life, fall in love, but also doesn't want to be a burden on the people to whom, her mother in this case specifically, but, she's 100% burden at that point. So the pursuit of some kind of normalcy would drive most people to distraction. I think as far as one of the backstories, that's just the most feelsy. I mean, I think it's without question that Yuri's is simply the most terrifying. But I mean that's simply the most complete cruelty. You can
Mm-hmm.
feel for Iwasawa. You can feel for even Naoi, who was basically abused mentally by his father and other stuff, and a lot. But that one was pure torture. Thankfully, in a weird way, it's so far over the edge that it's not going to hit you as hard. But good lord, like thieves breaking in and murdering your younger siblings one by one is a bad time. Bad time.
Yeah,
I
that was I almost couldn't believe that one. That it was really hard to suspend the disbelief just because it was so over the top.
But we never find out how she dies, do we? Or am I just not remembering?
I don't recall actually. I don't recall them actually talking about how she actually died. She talks about her life, but she doesn't talk about her death as far as I remember.
Since we're in the middle of everyone's backstories, I guess I'll bring up that I think is kind of my main complaint about the series, is that a lot of characters who I want to know why they're there or give me some connection to them overcoming. I don't think the series could have pulled off a two core, but it does feel like there were probably a lot of things that had to get dropped for the anime series that existed in the visual novel, because we don't get a whole lot of backstories. We don't. We only know 2 of 5 of Girl's Dead Monster characters. You don't need everything. I didn't need the tragic backstory of the kid who wanted to be called the Christ the whole time.
Oh
Sadly,
God,
never was. And
no.
Noda is a joke character, though I could have used a little bit that made me, feel why he was drawn so close to Yuri. But it does feel like in the process of doing a lot of things where we don't get nearly as many people as we should, really. I mean, even Hinata's doesn't feel like it's the real story, because everyone else has these tragic backstories that end with their death, and his was just failed everyone trying to get to the Koshian, which, you can be crestfallen about, but you haven't stepped on the same scale as these other people yet.
No.
So I do feel a little bit like they needed a little more time or a little more attention for some of the other characters. I mean, you can let TK be just 100% mysterious. That's perfectly fine.
Nope. Nope. I gotta protest that. I need more TK. I am so miffed. I don't know what TK's story was. I
And
mean, I agree with
I
LB, and if I had the editing skills, I could probably take 2 episodes out of this story and fix the pacing problems. But dang it, I'd put another one in just to get TK's story.
sounds good.
So, getting past the origin stories and getting into the final, quarter third of the series, where they really ramp up, well, they attempt to ramp up the tension by introducing these shadow characters that turn them into NPCs. um I'm kind of curious, did anybody else actually feel the tension rise as they were watching these final episodes? Because for me, I was, like I said, ready for characters to start disappearing, even though a couple of them were a little easy, like the band members from Girls Dead Monster just saying, okay, we're ready, and then next thing you know, they're gone. So that was a little annoying. But other than that, I mean, the tension, they tried to raise it and they tried to explain this world through, the mysterious circumstances in episode 12. But I'm kind of curious, Bama, let's start with you. Did you actually feel like the tension rising at this point, or were you just kind of there for this?
Um, I was actually closer to what you described. I saw the tension it felt like I was supposed to be feeling more tense about the whole thing, but instead I was like, okay, so the first antagonist this was supposed to be Angel, even though I never really suspected she was an antagonist. And then we had this other guy with this giant hat that was supposed to be the bad guy. And now he's a good guy. So they're having to come up with something, and it's these crazy shadows. Okay. You
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
gotta. I did kind of enjoy them heading back down into the depths and meeting the I don't know what his name was, but he was clearly the architect from The Matrix Part 2. I mean, they took the architect out of The Matrix and said, "We shall animate him." And thus they did. And just like the architect, they meet. The architect meets the main character, and then never seen again. There we
I
go.
did enjoy I did enjoy that guy's introduction. Uh, I find it I always excuse me. I always find it interesting going back to things where one of my favorite voice actors was in something, but I watched it prior to knowing instantly that person's voice anywhere. So his voice actor is Akira Ishida, who is Kikuhiko from the Rakugo anime, and that was what locked his voice into uh, into me specifically. Just like Iwasawa was Miyuki Sawashiro, who's one of my favorites. So it always intrigues me going back to something and being like, "Oh my god, that was him," uh, because it was prior to knowing that. that it was him, like he was in Chrono Crusade as well. But yeah, I certainly did not feel any tension or danger from it. They introduce a concept, and you might think, okay, here's the ticking clock of this world coming to an end, and people either have to come to terms with themselves and self obliterate, or they'll get consumed by it. But I think one of the things that I had kind of forgotten about, because what largely leaves the greatest effect on you is the end effect of it. So I think of Angel Beats more as a, you know, in the ways in which it is able to push and pull the heartstrings around and be kind of feelsy. Until re-experiencing it, I'd forgotten how much of a goofy ass comedy it is. So
Yeah.
and there is too much goofy comedy to it for me to have thought that they were going to do anything that was a serious danger at the end. I could see them still trying to do what they just did in, the episode prior with Yui, and before that with Otanashi and the train and other stuff. That I could still see happening. I couldn't really take a danger that would, at this point, there's not much of the series left, so we have to assume that it's just people getting blown into nothingness at that point. And I'm like, they're not going to do that to these characters, especially because we didn't learn anything about most of these folks. So I was not seeing that being a possibility of something that they were going to introduce right at the end. Maybe possibly for one of them to be a big dramatic point that they would get over at the end, but not as the way that they would start getting taken out of the show. I don't know about you.
I mean, the first time I watched the series all the way through, I remember I felt the feels in the final episodes. I definitely was hit a little harder by it, but this time around, and knowing the main story beats of what was going on, I didn't feel nearly as strongly about the ending as I did originally. I know that I shed a few tears when I first watched this all the way through. This time around, I was just kind of idly getting through the last couple of episodes and just kind of dealing with other stuff while it was playing. I just didn't click with me as much this time, but I'm kind of curious, Bama, the final episode, episode 13, with the whole graduation scene, was that satisfying for you? Was it a good way to close out the series, or do you kind of wish they had gone a different direction?
I liked the graduation aspect of it. I thought that was interesting. And the fact when they made that one guy dress up as the principal, that just cracked me up so hard. Um
Hinata made a good principal.
I I wasn't crazy about Angel having gotten what's his number's heart. I mean, my knee jerk reaction, and I just yell at the screen. I was like, "What the? No, she was there before he died. How could she have gotten his heart?" And Andy says, "Well, do you expect time to work the exact same over there?" And I'm going, "Dude, there's got to be something because this makes like zero sense." Um, and then of course when she vanishes anyway, and he's just screaming for her, and I'm like, that got so dark out of nowhere, super, super fast. And I was mollified at the very end when they had apparently reincarnated and now they could be together. But
Well, that
yeah, I thought that was it was a little hard for me to swallow. And dang, it was so intense. All of a sudden, really kind of out of nowhere nearly. I mean, I could tell that he was falling in love with her, but well, no, I'm not even going to say that because he wasn't much friendlier to her than he was to literally anybody else. So, yeah, I don't know. It felt a little contrived for me.
It does feel like, again, we may be missing a number of scenes that were present in the visual novel, and that, of course, was at the time my original one. I think that was the driving reason that I assumed what she represented was she was his sister waiting for him. That made a lot more sense. He lived longer, and she was there to help him pass on. But then, they stayed out front that he'd already come to terms and he was a bug and shouldn't have been in there to begin with. And I'm like, oh, that's not what I expected. Uh, yeah, it doesn't matter a whole lot considering this is some weird supernatural quasi realm. To think that time doesn't really play all that straightforwardly here, and you could get a little coda with it. But definitely, it's a little odd. It does feel like it's trying to get stuffed right there at the very end. You think maybe they'll both continue on to help others, or only he will because he'll have let the other one pass on, or she was there to let him pass. You could have played off any of those, but I wasn't too invested in. Oh yes, they were drawn to each other, but that to me that's where the whole sibling thing came from. He was so instantly drawn to her and trusting of her and protective of her that it felt like a sibling bond rather than a
Yeah.
another thing going on. That does lead into one thing that I don't know if any of you watched the ED every time,
I
or
did, yeah.
or at
The
least
ED?
watched it enough.
The
The
ending
ending
theme.
theme.
Oh, yeah. I think so anyway. I might No, I take it back. We were a little scared we weren't going to be able to finish it by now, so we did skip some of the endings.
There were interesting bits of storytelling that you could get from it because it widens out into a big cast shot with everyone, but in each episode they're being moved around a little bit. So it's episode 2 is the first one that has the official ED. In episode 3, Iwasawa is gone, but Takayama joined into it, and then once Yui joins, she and Hinata are in this, crazy pose, and Otonashi and Hinata are no longer doing a bro forearm slam. I don't really get that pose. That's a weird. I'm like high fiving. That I understand. Forearm smacking. I'm not sure it's a thing. But you get that you get Takamatsu with his shiny chest in there. When people start disappearing, they start disappearing. Uh, the but it plays into the end, and I thought it might have ended there in it because it's playing backwards and people are disappearing from all of the sides, and it gets back, and the last 5 people or the last 4 people are the ones who were in that graduation. No, 5 including Kanade, who was finally allowed in one. So they disappear in order, and Kanade disappears, and then you wonder, like, is Otonashi going to stay there? And he does disappear in the end, and you just get the blank canvas of the background at last, and that could have been exactly where it ends because that bit of storytelling at least told you that he was able to come to terms to it and left himself. But yeah, you get the end splash, the even more afterward, which makes you think, okay, oh, they get to meet each other out in the world, but as stated by both of us so far, it didn't really feel strong enough to be compelled by, oh goody, they get to have an actual relationship out in the world. I don't know where you fall on not not the tear jerkiness, but the character relations, and especially Otanashi and Kanade at the end.
I wouldn't say that I felt a sibling bond between them. I do think that it was a romantic bond. I think that it wasn't a very strong one, but I do think that it was a romantic bond between them. I've said this before in articles, and no one has ever, sent a lynch mob after me, so I think that some people agree. Jun Maeda is great with writing stories. He comes up with really fascinating, interesting stories. He doesn't know how to write endings, though. That's the big problem with all of his series, is that he writes really interesting worlds and he creates fascinating characters to start off with, but by the end he never has any idea what to do.
Mm.
I'd have to pour through a few more for that. I did not get any sense of the usual ending fell off a cliff. So it may not be exactly what I wanted or what could have been most interesting, and maybe he's playing up a thing that doesn't land well. But it's not like I was crestfallen at the ending in general, and it didn't seem like he had no idea what he was doing for it. So
Yeah, I mean, let me rephrase that. Angel Beats is not a series where the ending falls off a cliff, and not like, unlike, series like Charlotte or The Day I Became a God, which do have endings that fall off a cliff. But Angel Beats is a series where I think the ending could have been handled a little bit better. I think
sure.
that's the main point that I'm getting at, in that this is a generally good series. I enjoy watching it. It's not something that I go back and revisit on a regular basis, but I did enjoy it. I just think that the ending could have been handled a little bit better. I'm not sure what I would have changed. But I do think that I agree with Bama that the intensity and darkness of the last few moments was a bit sudden. So I think that that's kind of the where I'm getting at with this one.
Yeah, that I can see, because he's supposed to be the one who was at peace with things in general and was bringing it to everyone else. And even though obviously he cared for Tachibana at the end, it didn't seem like it's the kind of thing where you're both going through your being at peace, or you're helping her come to terms with it, rather than this fearful desperation, because it's like you were just doing the opposite for everyone else. And I can see a little bit of, I don't want to die, clinginess to it at the end, because you found someone that you could be with. But in the end, the whole point was, coming to terms with your life and the what youth you did experience, however cut off it was, and going beyond it, because they all seemed to at least believe that there was a beyond to go to. Whether they would remember anything about the before, it seemed to be acceptance of the end, and you don't get a feeling as to why he suddenly turned on a dime there.
So, all right, did anybody have any final thoughts or anything that they wanted to bring up before we wrap things up?
Uh, I don't know. I think to lean on one of the things, because we implied a few things where you had Tachibana at the end, the revelation of her not being an antagonist was one thing, but she was still kind of an emotionless weirdo. And then just the joke of it being that she was so far from understanding how to do what her job was, which was to help people come to terms with that she was so off the fact that he made a comment and so she stabbed him to death, and it was like from her perspective that was the thing to do, but from anyone else's perspective it would get interpreted entirely. She was as much of an idiot as everyone else was, and there's an element of enjoying that everyone is real damn stupid. And in the end I enjoyed, especially during the see, this is the weird thing, and I enjoyed a lot during the graduation, the end episode, that she was being smiling and emotional and much more. Both Yuri and she were like, normal girls in general, normal characters at least. Uh, and she was busy doing all of the help for it. That was another reason when I first watched it that I'm like, okay, she's just going to reveal herself as his sister, because he was literally the first time that we see him talking to her. It's about how school is meaningless for an idiot like him, and he doesn't care about it, and she's just wishing and hoping to go to school and make experiences. And I'm like, that's literally, you're literally calling back to exactly what you did before. What do you mean she's not his sister? Because you don't have to do a time dilation thing at the end either to be like, I had your heart. And you don't have to consider that his noble sacrifice only gave her a couple of years. And then she died too.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, man. But it was definitely fun getting that bit of her out before the end, and led to some smiles moments. So now, one thing I thought you would mention, but maybe you weren't doing a whole lot. So this is more of a question specifically for you, LB. Uh, the director of Angel Beats. Angel Beats was, I think, the first series of note that he did, but do you recall who the director is? And
I
what else
believe
he's
it
done?
was Seiji Kishi,
Yes, it is.
and I believe that would be the director of Bass Class.
That indeed it would be.
Yes,
So
I did recall that. Yes.
okay. So yes, that being your favorite series, and this being another one, how what I suppose, did you get any like flavors of doing things? Just the fact that it was a bunch of school kids shooting firearms the whole time. I'm like, yeah, well, they picked, I suppose, the right guy when Assassination Classroom came around later on. I'm like, this is pretty fitting for what for the biggest series that he did up to that point. But were there anything in particular that you felt, kind of shines through as a stylistic thing or something notable that was carried in that was enjoyable thereof? Or it's just more of a, knowing it's the same guy, but there's a difference between, the decades, or a decade away from one show to the other, and first first real runs at it versus a mature hand at it.
I wouldn't say that there was anything from this series that made me think about Ass Class and things that he took with him to that future series. I'd say, if anything, I think you hit it on the head with the school kids using large firearms. I think that's probably what he took with him from this series. The thing is with Seiji Kishi is that he doesn't really have a distinct style that I've been able to tell. I mean, if, for example, my favorite director, Akiyuki Simbo, he has a style. He when you watch a series done by Simbo, you know that he had his hands in it because of the way that the way that it looks, the way that it feels. You know that. With Kishi, on the other hand, he doesn't have that distinct style. He doesn't have that distinct thing that stands out as his.
Gotcha. Now I know
Uh,
Kishi also did Persona 4 as his next series, and I figured they tapped him just because Naoi looks so much like Naoto that they're like, oh, well, obviously we gotta get. He knows how to direct a character that looks very much like this. No, maybe not. Maybe that's overthinking it.
Bama, how about you? Did you have any final thoughts, final comments, final things you wanted to bring up before we wrap things up?
I'm trying to think of something, but I'm really kind of coming up a blank.
No, that's totally fine.
Not a requirement.
So, on that point, let's go ahead. Let's wrap things up. Thank you very much to CT and Bama for joining me for another fun discussion.
It was a good time.
Thanks for having me.
We haven't decided what the next series that we're gonna watch is yet. CT and I have been in active discussions and debates about that, but we will announce it on Twitter as soon as we know. And thank you all to all of you for listening to us ramble for the last hour. Wow, am I gonna have to do a lot of editing on this episode? And we hope that you'll tune in again next month. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night, folks.
Good night.